The morning, Sarah Foster found herself locked in her mother's sewing room with nothing but a ruined dress and trembling hands. She knew her life in Philadelphia society was over. It was 1878, and at 22 years old, she had just been dismissed from yet another finishing school after accidentally setting fire to the headmistress's curtains while attempting to iron a petticoat. Her mother's voice carried through the door, sharp and final as a judge's gavel. "You will never be a good wife, Sarah. No decent man will want a woman who cannot even manage the simplest domestic tasks." Those words echoed in Sarah's mind 3 weeks later as she stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Las Vegas, Nevada. Her entire life packed into 2 worn carpet bags, and her heart heavy with the weight of failure. The desert town shimmered in the August heat, a collection of wooden buildings and canvas tents scattered along the edge of civilization. Sarah had come west with nothing but a desperate plan and the address of a distant cousin who supposedly ran a boarding house. She had written ahead, offering to help with cooking and cleaning in exchange for room and board, carefully omitting the fact that she had never successfully completed either task without some minor catastrophe. The letter she received in return had been brief but not unkind. "Come if you must. We can always use an extra pair of hands." Sarah adjusted her traveling hat and looked down the unpaved Main Street, trying to orient herself. Saloons lined one side, their painted signs promising entertainment and spirits. A general store occupied the corner, its windows displaying everything from mining equipment to bolts of calico. Men in dusty work clothes moved between buildings, their spurs jingling with each step. A few women in practical cotton dresses hurried past, shielding their faces from the relentless sun with parasols that had seen better days. "You lost, miss." The voice came from behind her, deep and warm with a hint of amusement. Sarah turned and found herself looking up into the most striking pair of gray eyes she had ever seen. The man stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered beneath a faded blue shirt, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath a wide-brimmed hat. A bandana hung loosely around his neck, and worn leather chaps covered his dusty trousers. He looked every inch the cowboy she had read about in dime novels, except his face held genuine concern rather than the rakish swagger those stories always described. "I am looking for Mrs. Margaret Foster's boarding house," Sarah said, trying to maintain the proper deportment her mother had drilled into her despite the sweat trickling down her spine. "I was told it was on this street." "Foster?" The cowboy's expression shifted, something like recognition crossing his features. "You must be the cousin from back east. Margaret mentioned you might be coming." He gestured down the street with one gloved hand. "Her place is about 3 buildings down on the left. You cannot miss it. It has blue shutters." "Thank you very much, Mr." Sarah trailed off, waiting for him to supply his name. Ryder Rawlins. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that seemed both formal and natural. "I work at the Triple Creek Ranch about 15 miles north of town. We supply most of the beef for the restaurants and boarding houses around here, including your cousin's establishment." Sarah nodded, suddenly aware of how dusty and disheveled she must appear after 3 weeks of travel. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Rawlins. Good day." She gathered her bags and started walking, acutely conscious of his gaze following her down the street. When she glanced back, he was still standing by the stage-coach station, his hat now in his hands, watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher. Margaret Foster turned out to be a weathered woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and capable hands. She welcomed Sarah into the boarding house with a quick embrace and a practical assessment that made Sarah's stomach clench with familiar anxiety. "You look half dead from that journey," Margaret said, ushering Sarah into a surprisingly cool interior. "Let me show you to your room and then we will talk about what needs doing around here. I run a clean establishment, Sarah. My boarders expect hot meals 3 times a day and fresh linens twice a week. Can you manage that?" Sarah swallowed hard. "I will certainly try my best, Cousin Margaret." Something in her tone must have given her away because Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. "You have done this kind of work before, have you not?" "I have helped my mother," Sarah said carefully, which was technically true even if that help had usually resulted in disasters ranging from scorched soup to sheets dyed an unfortunate shade of pink. Margaret studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Well, we shall see how it goes. Lord knows I need the help. I have 6 permanent boarders and travelers coming through regularly. The work is hard, Sarah, but honest. If you are willing to learn, I am willing to teach." Relief flooded through Sarah, even as dread coiled in her stomach. She would try. She would try harder than she ever had before because failure here meant having nowhere else to go. The first week proved every bit as difficult as Sarah had feared. On Monday, she burned the breakfast biscuits so badly that Margaret had to throw out the entire batch and start over while Sarah scrubbed the blackened pan. On Tuesday, she somehow managed to put salt instead of sugar in the morning coffee, resulting in 6 very unhappy boarders spitting their first sips onto the dining room floor. By Wednesday, Margaret's patient expression had begun showing cracks of frustration. "How is it possible that you do not know the difference between salt and sugar?" Margaret asked, not unkindly but with genuine bewilderment. "They do not even look the same." "I was not paying attention," Sarah admitted miserably. "I was thinking about the laundry, and I just reached for the wrong container." "You need to focus on one task at a time," Margaret said firmly. "This is not Philadelphia, Sarah. Out here, mistakes can mean the difference between eating and going hungry. My boarders work hard and they deserve proper meals." Sarah nodded, fighting back tears of frustration. She had heard variations of this speech her entire life. Focus, pay attention, try harder. But somehow, no matter how hard she concentrated, something always went wrong. On Thursday morning, Ryder Rawlins walked into the boarding house dining room carrying a crate of fresh beef wrapped in butcher paper. Sarah was setting the table for breakfast, trying desperately to remember which side the fork belonged on, when she heard his distinctive boot steps in the hallway. "Morning, Margaret," he called out. "Got your weekly delivery." "Bring it through to the kitchen, Ryder," Margaret's voice responded from somewhere deeper in the house. "And stay for breakfast if you have time. I just pulled fresh bread from the oven." Sarah kept her eyes on the silverware, determined not to make another mistake. Fork on the left, knife on the right, spoon beside the knife. Or was it knife on the left? She stood frozen, trying to visualize the proper table settings from her childhood dining room. "Need some help." Ryder's voice came from directly behind her, making her jump. The fork clattered to the floor. "No, thank you," Sarah said quickly, bending to retrieve it. "I am managing perfectly well." He said nothing, but she could feel his presence as she straightened, acutely aware that her hair was escaping its pins, and her apron bore evidence of that morning's cooking disasters. When she finally looked up, his expression held no mockery, only a gentle curiosity that somehow made everything worse. "Fork goes on the left," he said quietly. "Knife and spoon on the right." "I know that," Sarah snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. "I apologize, I am just tired." First week is always the hardest. Ryder moved past her to set the table with quick, efficient movements that spoke of long practice. "When I first started working cattle, I could not even saddle my own horse properly. Nearly got trampled my first day out." Sarah watched him work, surprised by his easy competence with what she had assumed were feminine tasks. "You know how to set a table. I know how to do a lot of things people might not expect." He finished the last place setting and turned to face her fully. "Growing up, it was just me and my pa after my mother passed. I learned to cook, clean, mend clothes, everything that needed doing. Pa said a man who could not take care of himself was not much of a man at all." "That is very different from what I was taught," Sarah said softly. "I was raised to believe that a woman's entire value lay in her ability to manage a household properly, and I have failed at that rather spectacularly." Ryder tilted his head, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "Why would you say that?" "Because it is true." Sarah gestured helplessly around the dining room. "I cannot cook without burning things. I cannot clean without breaking things. I put salt in the coffee and dye in the wash water and ruin everything I touch. My own mother told me I would never be a good wife, and she was absolutely right." The words hung in the air between them, raw and painful. Sarah had not meant to say so much, especially not to this virtual stranger, but exhaustion and frustration had loosened her tongue. Ryder was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice so gentle it made Sarah's chest ache, "I reckon your mother was wrong about that." "You do not know me well enough to make that judgment," Sarah said, trying to inject some lightness into her tone despite the tears threatening to spill over. "Maybe not." Ryder picked up his hat from where he had set it on a chair. "But I know that anyone willing to travel 2,000 miles to start over, willing to keep trying even when things go wrong, has more courage than most folks I have met. That seems like a pretty good quality in a wife or a person generally." Before Sarah could respond, Margaret bustled in from the kitchen carrying a platter of eggs and fried potatoes. "Ryder, stop pestering my cousin and sit down for breakfast. Sarah, call the boarders down, please." The meal passed in a blur of serving and clearing, with Sarah hyper-aware of Ryder's presence at the far end of the table. He ate quietly, occasionally joining the conversation when one of the other boarders asked him about conditions at the ranch. She noticed how the other men treated him with casual respect, how they listened when he spoke about the cattle market and water rights and the coming autumn roundup. After breakfast, as Sarah was clearing dishes, Margaret pulled her aside in the kitchen. "Ryder is a good man," she said without preamble. "One of the best I have met out here. Honest, hardworking, treats women with respect. Half the single ladies in Las Vegas have set their caps for him at one time or another." "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked, genuinely confused. Margaret gave her a knowing look. "Because I saw the way he looked at you just now, and I saw the way you looked at him. I just want you to know that if something develops there, you have my blessing. But also know that Ryder is not the settling down type. He has been alone since his father died 5 years ago, seems content with his life as it is." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Nothing is developing, Cousin Margaret. We barely know each other." Hum. Margaret did not sound convinced. "Well, just keep in mind what I said. Now, let me show you the proper way to wash dishes without chipping them." Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself settling into a tentative rhythm at the boarding house. She still made mistakes, but Margaret's patient instruction helped her understand the underlying logic of household tasks in a way her mother's sharp criticism never had. She learned that cooking was as much about timing and observation as following recipes, that cleaning required a systematic approach rather than frantic rushing from task to task. Ryder came by every Thursday morning with the weekly meat delivery. He always stayed for breakfast, always found some way to exchange a few words with Sarah. Sometimes it was just a greeting, other times a comment about the weather or questions about how she was settling in. Nothing improper, nothing that would raise eyebrows, but Sarah found herself looking forward to those Thursday mornings with an anticipation that felt dangerous. One afternoon in late September, Sarah was in the general store purchasing supplies for the boarding house when she overheard a conversation between two well-dressed women examining bolts of fabric near the front counter. "Did you hear about Ryder Rawlins?" one of them asked in a carrying whisper. "Apparently, he is courting that strange girl staying at Margaret Foster's place. The one from back east." The second woman's voice dripped with disdain. "I heard she cannot even boil water without burning it. What would a man like Ryder want with someone so useless?" Sarah's face flamed, but she kept her back turned, pretending to examine a display of canned goods while her heart hammered against her ribs. "Perhaps he feels sorry for her," the first woman suggested. "You know how Ryder is, always helping strays and lost causes. Remember when he brought in that injured coyote and nursed it back to health?" They both laughed, the sound cutting through Sarah like glass. She waited until they left the store before completing her purchases, her hands shaking as she counted out coins for the clerk. Walking back to the boarding house, Sarah felt the old familiar shame settling over her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Of course, people were talking about her. Of course, they saw her as nothing more than another failure, another burden. And Ryder, kind and patient Ryder, probably did pity her. Why else would a man like him pay attention to someone like her? That Thursday, when Ryder arrived with the meat delivery, Sarah made herself scarce. She heard him asking Margaret where she was, heard her cousin's vague response about Sarah being busy with laundry. When Margaret called her for breakfast, Sarah claimed she had already eaten, though her stomach growled in protest. The following Thursday she avoided him again. And the Thursday after that. On the fourth Thursday, Ryder did not come to the boarding house. Margaret mentioned at dinner that he had sent one of the other ranch hands with the delivery, saying he was too busy to make the trip himself. Sarah told herself it did not matter, that this was exactly what she wanted. But she lay awake that night staring at the ceiling and feeling a hollow ache in her chest. October arrived with cooler temperatures and brilliant blue skies. The desert landscape transformed in subtle ways, the harsh summer glare softening into golden afternoon light. Sarah's skills in the kitchen had improved to the point where Margaret trusted her to prepare entire meals on her own, though she still hovered nearby, offering suggestions and corrections. One Saturday morning, Sarah was kneading bread dough when Margaret announced she needed to visit a sick friend on the other side of town and would be gone most of the day. "You will need to manage the midday meal yourself," Margaret said, tying on her bonnet. "It is just sandwiches and soup, nothing too complicated. Can you handle it?" Sarah's first instinct was to say no, to beg Margaret not to leave her alone with such responsibility, but she swallowed her fear and nodded. "I can handle it." The morning passed smoothly enough. Sarah prepared the bread dough for its final rise, set a pot of beef soup on the stove to simmer, and sliced cold roast chicken for sandwiches. The boarders had all gone out for the day, leaving the house blessedly quiet. Sarah found herself humming as she worked, enjoying the rare solitude. She was arranging sandwiches on a platter when someone knocked at the front door. Wiping her hands on her apron, Sarah went to answer it, expecting perhaps one of Margaret's friends or a traveling salesman. Instead, she found Ryder Rawlins standing on the porch, hat in his hands, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Mr. Rawlins," Sarah said, hating how breathless her voice sounded. "Margaret is not here today." "I know." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I came to see you, Miss Foster, if you have a few minutes to spare." Sarah's heart began pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I am preparing lunch. Perhaps another time would be better, please." The word was simple, but the intensity in his gray eyes made it impossible to refuse. "I have been trying to figure out why you have been avoiding me, and I need to know if I did something to offend you." Sarah stepped back, allowing him to enter. She led him to the front parlor, acutely aware of her flour-dusted apron and the wisps of hair escaping her bun. They sat in stiff chairs facing each other, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. "You did not offend me," Sarah said finally. "I simply thought it best to maintain some distance." "Why?" Ryder leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Did someone say something to you?" "About me, about us." Sarah looked down at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. "I overheard some women talking in the general store. They said you were courting me out of pity, that I was just another one of your lost causes. Like an injured coyote, you felt obligated to help." The silence that followed was so complete, Sarah could hear the ticking of the parlor clock. When she finally dared to look up, Ryder's expression had transformed into something she could not quite identify. Not anger exactly, but a fierce intensity that made her breath catch. "Is that what you think?" His voice was low, controlled. "That I have been spending time with you out of pity? I do not know what else it could be." Sarah forced herself to meet his gaze. "You barely know me, Mr. Rawlins. And what you do know is that I am incompetent at nearly everything a woman is supposed to be good at. Why would a man like you be interested in someone like me, unless it was out of some misplaced sense of charity?" Ryder stood abruptly, crossing to the window where he stood looking out at the dusty street. His shoulders were tense beneath his shirt, his jaw tight. When he finally spoke, his words were measured and deliberate. "When I was 12 years old, my mother got sick with pneumonia. We were living on a small ranch in Colorado, miles from the nearest town. My father rode through a blizzard to fetch the doctor, but by the time they returned, it was too late. She died the next morning." He paused, his hand gripping the window frame. "Before she passed, she made me promise something. She said, 'Ryder, when you are old enough to choose a wife, do not pick someone for how well she can cook or clean or any of those things people say matter. Pick someone with a good heart, someone brave enough to face life's hardships without breaking. That is what makes a true partner.'" Sarah sat frozen, hardly daring to breathe. Ryder turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her chest tighten. "I have met plenty of women who could cook a perfect meal and keep a spotless house. Some of them were kind, some were not. Some had dreams beyond their kitchens, some did not. But I never met anyone quite like you, Sarah Foster." "What do you mean?" Sarah whispered. "You traveled 2,000 miles alone to start over in a place you had never seen, with no guarantee of what you would find here. You work every day at tasks that do not come naturally to you, and you keep trying even when you fail. You are honest about your shortcomings instead of hiding them. And you have one of the kindest hearts I have ever encountered." He took a step closer. "I do not spend time with you out of pity, Sarah. I spend time with you because when I am around you, I feel more alive than I have in years." Sarah stood on trembling legs, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. "But I cannot even do the simple things right. How could I possibly be what you need? You are already perfect, just as you are." Ryder closed the distance between them, reaching out to gently cup her face in his work-roughened hands. "I do not need perfect meals or a spotless house. I need someone who will face life with me, who will laugh with me when things go wrong and celebrate with me when they go right. I need someone real, Sarah, someone like you." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, they were tears of relief rather than shame. "I have spent my entire life being told I was not good enough. It is hard to believe anything different. I know." Ryder's thumbs gently wiped away her tears. "But I am a patient man, and I am willing to spend as much time as it takes convincing you. What exactly are you saying, Mr. Rawlins? I am saying that I would like to court you properly, Miss Foster, with your permission and your cousin's blessing. I am saying that I see a future with you in it, if you will have me. Sarah's answer came without hesitation, rising from somewhere deep inside her that had been dormant for far too long. Yes. Ryder's smile was like sunrise breaking over the desert, warm and brilliant and full of promise. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Then, I am the luckiest man in Nevada. The soup boiled over onto the stove at that exact moment, sending up a cloud of steam and the acrid smell of scorched metal. Sarah jumped back with a gasp, but Ryder just laughed, a deep, genuine sound that filled the parlor with joy. I should go tend to that, Sarah said, mortified. Let me help. Ryder followed her to the kitchen, where they worked together to salvage what they could of the soup and clean up the mess. He moved easily in the domestic space, his presence somehow making the kitchen feel less intimidating. When they had finished, he pulled her close and kissed her properly, a sweet, lingering kiss that tasted of hope and new beginnings. I should go, he said reluctantly when they finally broke apart, but I will be back tomorrow. Maybe we could take a walk after church. I would like that very much. After he left, Sarah stood in the middle of the kitchen, touching her lips with wondering fingers. The burned soup sat in the sink, evidence of yet another culinary failure, but for once, she did not feel the crushing weight of inadequacy. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar and precious, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was enough exactly as she was. Margaret returned that evening to find Sarah singing while she prepared dinner, a sight that made her stop in the doorway with raised eyebrows. "What has gotten into you?" she asked, though her smile suggested she could guess. "Ryder came by today," Sarah said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "He asked to court me and I said yes. Well, it is about time." Margaret set down her basket and embraced her cousin warmly. "I thought you two would never stop dancing around each other. He is a good man, Sarah. Treat him well, and he will do the same for you." "You think I can make this work?" Sarah asked, voicing the fear that still lurked beneath her happiness. "Do you think I can be the kind of wife a man like Ryder deserves?" Margaret pulled back, holding Sarah at arm's length with a serious expression. "Listen to me carefully, Sarah. The problem was never that you could not learn to cook or clean or manage a household. The problem was that you were being taught by people who measured your worth by impossible standards, who punished you for your mistakes instead of helping you learn from them. You have more potential than you realize, but more importantly, you have a good heart and a strong spirit. That matters more than any amount of domestic skill." The courtship that followed was unlike anything Sarah had imagined. Ryder came to town every Sunday after church, and they would walk together through the desert landscape surrounding Las Vegas, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on his father's ranch, about the years after his mother died when it had been just the two of them against the world. He described his dreams of expanding the Triple Creek Ranch, of building something lasting that could be passed down through generations. Sarah, in turn, found herself opening up about her childhood in Philadelphia, about the constant pressure to conform to expectations she could never quite meet. She told him about the finishing schools and the disappointed looks, the whispered conversations she was not supposed to hear about what a burden she was to her family. They were wrong, Ryder said fiercely one afternoon as they sat on a rocky outcropping overlooking the valley. "Every single one of them. You were not the problem, Sarah. They were. It is hard to believe that when you have heard the opposite your entire life," Sarah admitted. "But when I am with you, it feels possible." November brought the autumn roundup, and Ryder was gone for nearly 2 weeks gathering cattle from the open range. Sarah missed him with an intensity that surprised her, counting the days until his return. She threw herself into her work at the boarding house, determined to prove to herself that she could be competent and capable. Under Margaret's patient guidance, Sarah's skills continued to improve. She learned to read the signs when bread dough had risen enough, to judge when meat was cooked through without cutting into it, to organize her cleaning tasks so that one did not interfere with another. The mistakes still happened, but less frequently, and when they did, Sarah found she could laugh them off rather than spiral into self-recrimination. When Ryder finally returned to town, dusty and exhausted from 2 weeks on the range, his first stop was the boarding house. Sarah heard the commotion in the hallway and rushed from the kitchen to find him standing just inside the front door, his face lighting up when he saw her. "I missed you," he said simply, and pulled her into an embrace that smelled of leather and sage and the wide open spaces of the desert. "I missed you too," Sarah murmured against his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her cheek. That evening, after he had cleaned up and eaten the dinner Sarah had carefully prepared, Ryder asked if she would take a walk with him. They strolled through the quiet streets of Las Vegas as the sun set in brilliant streaks of orange and purple across the western sky. "I did a lot of thinking while I was out on the range," Ryder said, his hand warm around hers. "About my life, about what I want for the future. And I kept coming back to the same conclusion." Sarah's heart began to race. What conclusion was that? That I do not want to spend another day without knowing you are going to be part of my life permanently. He stopped walking and turned to face her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Sarah Foster, I know we have not been courting for very long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the last rays of sunlight. It was not elaborate or expensive, but it was beautiful in its honest simplicity. Sarah looked from the ring to Ryder's face, seeing the hope and vulnerability in his eyes. Every doubt, every insecurity that had been drilled into her over the years rose up in her throat. She was not the kind of woman men like Ryder were supposed to marry. She was clumsy and forgetful and still burned dinner more often than she cared to admit. But then she remembered his words from that day in the parlor. "You are already perfect, just as you are." "Yes," Sarah said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, I will marry you." Ryder's whoop of joy echoed down the empty street as he swept her up and spun her around. When he set her down, he slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her with a passion that made her dizzy. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Las Vegas. Margaret stood as Sarah's witness, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she watched her cousin pledge her life to the cowboy who had stolen her heart. Several of Ryder's friends from the Triple Creek Ranch attended, along with a handful of boarding house regulars who had grown fond of Sarah, despite her domestic mishaps. Sarah wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton that Margaret had helped her sew, with wildflowers from the desert woven into her hair. She had never felt more beautiful than when she saw Ryder's expression as she walked down the aisle toward him, his gray eyes filled with such love and certainty that her own doubts evaporated like morning dew. "I promise to love you exactly as you are," Ryder said when it came time for his vows. "To support your dreams and catch you when you fall. To laugh with you and cry with you and face whatever life brings us together. You are my home, Sarah Foster, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Sarah's voice shook as she said her own vows, promising to stand beside him through whatever came, to build a life together founded on honesty and acceptance, rather than impossible expectations. After the ceremony, they held a small celebration at the boarding house. Margaret had prepared a feast with Sarah's help, though Sarah had been relegated to simpler tasks to avoid any wedding day disasters. The beef roast was perfect, the potatoes were fluffy, and the bread only slightly overdone on one edge. As the sun began to set, Ryder pulled Sarah aside onto the back porch where they could have a moment of privacy. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Ready to leave town and start our life at the ranch?" Sarah had spent the past week packing her few belongings and saying goodbye to Margaret, who had cried and fussed over her like a mother hen. The ranch was 15 miles north of Las Vegas, far enough that Sarah would not be able to visit town frequently. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I am ready," Sarah said, and meant it. "As long as I am with you, I am ready for anything." They spent their wedding night in a small room at the boarding house before setting out the next morning for the Triple Creek Ranch. Ryder had driven a wagon into town, loaded with supplies for the coming winter. Sarah sat beside him on the bench seat, watching the landscape change as they left Las Vegas behind. The ranch house appeared on the horizon after about 2 hours of travel, a sturdy adobe structure with a covered porch and corrals spread out behind it. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and Sarah could see cattle grazing in the distance against the backdrop of blue mountains. "It is not fancy," Ryder said, suddenly sounding nervous, "but it is solid and weatherproof. I built most of it with my father before he passed. We can make improvements as we go along." "It is perfect," Sarah said honestly, taking in the neat yard and the flower beds someone had planted beneath the front windows. "Did you plant those?" "My mother did, years ago. I have tried to keep them going in her memory, though I am not much of a gardener." He helped her down from the wagon. "Would you like to see inside?" The interior was simple but comfortable, with whitewashed walls and sturdy furniture that had clearly been built to last. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. 2 bedrooms opened off the main space, and a small pantry was tucked behind the kitchen area. "I know it needs a woman's touch," Ryder said, watching Sarah explore. "I have been living like a bachelor for too long." Sarah turned to him with a smile. "It needs our touch." "This is our home now, Ryder. We will make it into whatever we want it to be together." The first weeks of married life were an adjustment for both of them. Sarah had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, which started before dawn and often did not end until after dark. Ryder worked long days managing the cattle and maintaining the property, while Sarah struggled to adapt to cooking on a wood stove that heated differently than Margaret's and cleaning a house much larger than her small room at the boarding house. There were mistakes, of course. Sarah burned an entire pot of beans so badly that Ryder had to bury the pot in the yard because the smell would not come out. She accidentally left the gate to the chicken coop open one afternoon, resulting in a frantic hour of chasing chickens all over the property. She put too much soap in the washing water and created a sudsy disaster that had Ryder laughing so hard he could barely stand. But through it all, Ryder never once made her feel inadequate or worthless. When she burned dinner, he would help her salvage what they could or ride into town for supplies to start over. When she made a mess, he would pitch in to clean it up. And when she dissolved into frustrated tears, convinced she would never get anything right, he would hold her and remind her that perfection was not what he wanted or needed from her. "We are partners," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. "That means we face everything together, good and bad. Your mistakes do not make you less valuable, Sarah. They make you human." As autumn gave way to winter, Sarah found herself settling into a routine. She learned which chores needed to be done daily and which could wait, how to prioritize her tasks so that the most important things got done even if everything else fell by the wayside. She started keeping notes in a journal, writing down recipes that worked and techniques she wanted to remember. Ryder was patient with her learning process, but he also held her accountable in a way that felt supportive rather than critical. If she forgot to collect eggs from the henhouse, he would remind her gently and explain why it mattered. If she left tools out in the weather, he would show her where they should be stored and why proper care of equipment was important on a ranch. In turn, Sarah began teaching herself skills that went beyond basic housekeeping. She learned to tend the vegetable garden Ryder had planted in the spring, to preserve food for the winter months, to mend torn clothing and broken tack. She discovered she had a talent for working with the horses, and Ryder began teaching her to ride properly so she could help move cattle when needed. By the time Christmas arrived, Sarah felt more at home on the Triple Creek Ranch than she ever had in her parents' Philadelphia mansion. She and Ryder celebrated quietly, exchanging simple gifts and spending the day in comfortable companionship. Sarah had knitted Ryder a new scarf, the stitches only slightly uneven. He gave her a beautiful leather-bound journal for her recipes and ranch notes, with her new name embossed on the cover in gold letters, Ryder Rawlins. "I love you," Sarah told him that night as they lay in bed, warm beneath thick quilts while winter wind rattled the windows. "I do not think I have ever been as happy as I am right now." Ryder pulled her closer, his arms strong and secure around her. "I love you too, and this is just the beginning, Sarah. We have our whole lives ahead of us." The new year brought new challenges and new triumphs. In January, a fierce snowstorm trapped them inside the house for 3 days. Sarah learned to ration their supplies carefully and keep the fire burning steadily. In February, one of their best breeding cows had trouble birthing her calf, and Sarah stayed up all night with Ryder helping deliver the baby safely. In March, Sarah successfully made her first perfect loaf of bread, golden and fluffy and absolutely delicious, and Ryder's proud smile made her feel like she had conquered the world. Spring arrived with wildflowers carpeting the desert and new calves dotting the pastures. Sarah discovered she was pregnant in April, and the joy on Ryder's face when she told him made her cry happy tears. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "A real family." "Were we not already a family?" Sarah teased, though she understood what he meant. "You know what I mean." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "This is everything I have ever wanted, Sarah. You, this ranch, a child to raise and teach and love. I cannot believe how lucky I am." The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and the summer heat made her miserable. But Ryder was attentive and caring, taking over more of the household chores without complaint and making sure she rested as much as possible. Margaret came out to visit in July, bringing supplies and advice and her own brand of no-nonsense encouragement. "You are doing wonderfully," she told Sarah, surveying the well-maintained house and thriving garden. "I told you that you had it in you. You just needed someone who believed in you." "Ryder believes in me," Sarah said softly. "He always has, even when I did not believe in myself. That is because he is smart enough to see what really matters." Margaret squeezed her hand. "You have built a good life here, Sarah. Your mother would be stunned speechless if she could see you now." Sarah had not heard from her parents since leaving Philadelphia. She had sent a letter announcing her marriage, but received no reply. It still hurt, that final rejection, but it no longer defined her. She had found her own family now, people who valued her for who she was rather than who they thought she should be. The baby arrived in late October during an early cold snap that had Ryder frantically stoking the fire to keep the bedroom warm. The birth was long and difficult, but Sarah was strong, and Margaret was there to help coach her through it. When the baby finally emerged, crying lustily, Sarah felt a surge of love so powerful it took her breath away. "It is a boy," Margaret announced, cleaning off the squirming infant and wrapping him in soft blankets. "A healthy baby boy." Ryder was crying openly as he took his son in his arms for the first time. "Hello there, little one," he murmured. "Welcome to the family." They named him Samuel, after Ryder's father, and from the moment he entered their lives, everything changed. Sarah discovered depths of patience and capability she had never known she possessed. She learned to function on minimal sleep, to anticipate the baby's needs, to soothe him when he cried and celebrate his tiny milestones. Ryder was a devoted father, helping with feedings and diaper changes and walking the floor with Samuel when he was fussy. Sarah would often wake in the night to find her husband sitting in the rocking chair by the window, their son cradled against his chest, both of them silhouetted in moonlight. "You are going to spoil him," Sarah said one such night, though her voice held no criticism. "Good," Ryder replied. "He should know that he is loved and wanted and valued, no matter what. That is the greatest gift we can give him." As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, Sarah marveled at how naturally motherhood came to her. It was not that she never made mistakes. She absolutely did. She sometimes forgot to pack enough diapers when they went to town, or misjudged how much food he needed, or let him get into things he should not have. But these mistakes did not define her or diminish her love for her son. They were simply part of learning, part of growing into her role as a mother. The ranch prospered under Ryder's careful management. He expanded their herd, improved their grazing lands, and built a reputation for quality cattle that brought buyers from as far away as California. Sarah took over more of the business side of things, keeping careful records of expenses and sales, negotiating with suppliers, and managing their finances. She discovered she had a head for numbers and strategy, skills that had never been recognized or valued back in Philadelphia. On their third wedding anniversary, Ryder took Sarah up to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. The sun was setting in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, painting the landscape in warm light. Samuel played at their feet, building towers from rocks and laughing when they toppled over. "Do you remember the day we met?" Ryder asked, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "You were so determined to make it on your own, so convinced that you were not good enough." "I was terrified," Sarah admitted. "I felt like such a failure. And now look at you." Ryder gestured to the ranch spread out below them. "You helped run this place. You raised a beautiful son. You built a life that most people only dream about. You are amazing, Sarah." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the truth of his words sink into her bones. She had spent so many years believing the cruel voices that told her she was inadequate, that she would never amount to anything. But those voices had been wrong. "I could not have done any of this without you," Sarah said. "You believed in me when no one else did. You saw something in me that I could not see in myself. I just saw the truth." Ryder kissed the top of her head. "You were always capable and strong and worthy of love. You just needed someone to give you room to be yourself instead of trying to force you into a mold you were never meant to fit." Sarah found herself pregnant again in the spring of their 4th year of marriage. This time she knew what to expect, and while the pregnancy was still challenging, she felt more confident in her ability to handle it. Their daughter was born in early winter, a tiny perfect creature with Ryder's gray eyes and Sarah's dark hair. They named her Emma, after Sarah's grandmother, the only member of her Philadelphia family who had ever shown her unconditional love. Holding her daughter for the first time, Sarah felt the last vestiges of her old insecurities finally slip away. She was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The years that followed were full of hard work, laughter, occasional disasters, and deep abiding love. Samuel grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the rhythms of ranch life. Emma was more reserved, content to spend hours in the garden with Sarah or helping with the household tasks. Both children grew up knowing they were loved not for what they could do, but for who they were. Sarah maintained her correspondence with Margaret, and they visited back and forth several times a year. Margaret eventually sold the boarding house and came to live at the ranch, occupying a small cottage Ryder built for her on the property. She helped with the children and the household, but more importantly, she provided Sarah with the maternal love and support she had never received from her own mother. Sarah never heard from her parents again. She had sent birth announcements when each of her children was born and a letter every Christmas for the first few years, but none were ever answered. Eventually, she stopped trying. It hurt, but it no longer had the power to destroy her. She had built her own family, created her own life, and that was enough. On a warm evening in late spring, when Samuel was 7 and Emma was 3, Sarah stood on the porch of the ranch house watching the sun set. Ryder came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you ever miss Philadelphia?" he asked quietly. "The life you could have had there." Sarah thought about it carefully. She thought about the grand houses and the fine clothes, the social events and the carefully orchestrated dinners. She thought about the constant scrutiny and the impossible standards, the feeling that she was always one mistake away from total rejection. "No," she said firmly. "I do not miss it at all. That life was never meant for me. This is where I belong." "I am glad you think so." Ryder kissed her cheek, "because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the desert transform in the fading light. Samuel's laughter drifted from somewhere behind the house, and Sarah could hear Margaret singing to Emma as she got her ready for bed. The air smelled of sage and dust, and the promise of summer. This was not the life anyone had predicted for Sarah Foster. It was messy and challenging and far from perfect. There were still days when she burned dinner or forgot important tasks or struggled with self-doubt, but those moments no longer defined her. She was a wife, a mother, a rancher, a woman who had found her place in the world not by conforming to someone else's expectations, but by having the courage to be herself. Years continued to pass in the steady rhythm of ranch life. Sarah and Ryder watched their children grow, celebrated their successes, and comforted them through their failures. They added more buildings to the ranch, more cattle to their herds. They survived droughts and harsh winters, good years and lean ones, always facing challenges together as partners. When Samuel was 12, he asked his mother about her life before the ranch. They were working together in the garden, pulling weeds and checking for pests, and something in his expression told Sarah that this was not casual curiosity. "Why do you ask?" Sarah said, sitting back on her heels. "Some boys at school were talking about how you came from a fancy family back east," Samuel said carefully. "They said you ran away because you could not handle being a proper lady. Is that true?" Sarah felt a familiar twist in her chest, but it was duller now, less sharp. "I suppose there is some truth to that," she said slowly. "I did not fit the mold my family wanted me to fit. I could not do the things they thought were important for a woman to know how to do, so I came west to start over." "You wish you had stayed?" Samuel asked. "Tried harder to be what they wanted?" "No." Sarah's answer was immediate and certain. If I had stayed, I would have spent my whole life feeling like a failure. I never would have met your father, never would have had you or your sister. I would have missed out on everything that truly matters." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "Some of the boys said I was lucky to have you as a mother because you are not like other mothers. They meant it as an insult, but I do not think it is. I think you are the best mother anyone could have." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes as she pulled her son into a tight embrace. "That is the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me. Thank you, Samuel." That conversation stayed with Sarah for days, warming her heart in quiet moments. Her children did not see her as a failure or a disappointment. They saw her as she truly was, and they loved her for it. That was worth more than all the social approval in the world. Emma grew into a thoughtful, intelligent girl who loved books and learning. When she was 10, Sarah began teaching her advanced arithmetic and geography, subjects Sarah herself had once struggled with but had mastered through necessity. She discovered she was a natural teacher, patient and creative in finding ways to explain difficult concepts. "You should start a school," Ryder suggested one evening after watching Sarah help Emma work through a particularly challenging mathematics problem. There are several families within riding distance who would love to have their children educated properly. The idea took root in Sarah's mind. By the time Emma was 12, Sarah had converted one of the outbuildings into a small schoolroom and was teaching not just her own children, but 5 other students from neighboring ranches. She loved the work, loved seeing young minds open to new ideas, loved being able to help children who struggled the way she once had. "You have found your calling," Margaret told her, watching Sarah prepare lessons one afternoon. "You are a wonderful teacher, Sarah." "It is strange," Sarah mused. "When I was young, I was told I would never amount to anything because I could not master the proper feminine arts. But out here, those things matter less than determination and creativity and the ability to solve problems. I am more successful now than I ever could have been in Philadelphia." "That is because you are in a place where people value what you have to offer," Margaret said. "And you have a partner who supports your dreams instead of trying to diminish them." Sarah glanced out the window to where Ryder was working with Samuel, teaching him to rope a fence post. "I am so grateful for him. He changed my entire life." "You changed each other's lives," Margaret corrected gently. "Do not sell yourself short, Sarah. You were brave enough to leave everything you knew and start over. You were strong enough to keep trying even when things were difficult. Ryder gave you support and love, but you did the hard work of becoming who you are today." Those words stayed with Sarah as months turned into years. She had come to Nevada as a frightened young woman convinced of her own inadequacy. And she had transformed into someone confident and capable, someone who contributed meaningfully to her community. Samuel eventually announced his intention to take over the ranch when he was old enough, and Ryder began training him in earnest. Emma wanted to become a teacher herself, and Sarah worked with her to prepare for the examinations that would allow her to teach in larger towns. Both children had grown up watching their parents work as equal partners, and they had absorbed those lessons well. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Ryder presented Sarah with a beautiful surprise. He had commissioned a carpenter in Las Vegas to build her a proper schoolhouse on their property, complete with desks, a chalkboard, and shelves for books. The building was small but well constructed, with large windows that let in plenty of light. "You have been teaching out of that cramped outbuilding for years," Ryder said as he led her inside. "You deserve a proper space for the important work you do." Sarah walked through the empty schoolroom, imagining it filled with students. "This is too much," she protested, though her voice was choked with emotion. "It is not nearly enough." Ryder pulled her into his arms. "You have given me and our children everything, Sarah. You have built a life here that goes beyond just our family. You are educating the next generation, making sure these children have opportunities we never had. That deserves to be honored." Sarah held him tightly, overwhelmed by gratitude and love. "How did I get so lucky?" she whispered. "How did I find you?" "I think we found each other," Ryder said. "And I thank God every day that we did." The schoolhouse became the center of a small educational community. Sarah's reputation as a patient, effective teacher spread, and soon she had a waiting list of families wanting to send their children to study with her. She taught reading, writing, mathematics, geography, and history, adapting her lessons to each student's needs and abilities. One afternoon, a young girl named Lucy came to Sarah after class, tears streaming down her face. "I cannot do this," Lucy sobbed. "I am too stupid to learn mathematics. My mother says I will never amount to anything if I cannot even do simple sums." Sarah's heart clenched with recognition. She knelt down to the girl's level, taking her hands gently. "Listen to me, Lucy. You are not stupid. Mathematics is challenging for many people, including me when I was your age. But struggling with something does not make you worthless or inadequate. It just means you need to find a different way of understanding it." "Really?" Lucy's voice was small and hopeful. "Really?" Sarah smiled. "Let me tell you a story about a girl who could not do anything right, who was told she would never be a good wife or a productive member of society. But she found people who believed in her anyway, who helped her see that her worth was not defined by the tasks she struggled with. That girl was me, Lucy. And if I can build a good life despite all my failings, so can you." She spent extra time with Lucy after that, patiently working through mathematical concepts until the girl finally understood. Watching Lucy's face light up with comprehension reminded Sarah of why this work mattered so much. She was not just teaching facts and figures. She was helping children believe in themselves. As Sarah approached her 40th birthday, she looked back on her life with profound satisfaction. She had built a marriage based on mutual respect and genuine love. She had raised 2 children who were confident, kind, and capable. She had created a school that served her community. She had transformed from a woman who could barely boil water into someone who managed a household, helped run a ranch, and educated the next generation. One evening, sitting on the porch with Ryder as they had done countless times before, Sarah said, "Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been? If I had never gotten on that stagecoach, if you had never stopped to help me that first day." "All the time," Ryder admitted. "And I am grateful every single day that fate brought us together." "I was so broken when I arrived here," Sarah said softly. "So convinced that I was worthless. I truly believed my mother when she said I would never be a good wife. And I hope you know now how wrong she was." Ryder turned to face her fully. "You are not just a good wife, Sarah. You are an extraordinary partner, mother, teacher, and woman. You have exceeded every expectation anyone could have had for you, not by becoming someone else, but by being exactly who you are." Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they were happy tears. "You told me once that I was already perfect, just as I was. I did not believe you then. And now," Ryder asked gently, "now I understand what you meant." Sarah took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You did not mean I was perfect in the sense of having no flaws or making no mistakes. You meant that I was worthy of love and acceptance exactly as I was, without needing to change or conform to someone else's standards. That was the greatest gift you ever gave me, Ryder. You helped me see myself clearly for the first time." "You gave me the same gift," Ryder said. "You showed me that a good life is not about perfection or meeting some arbitrary standard. It is about building something real with someone you love, about facing challenges together and celebrating victories together. You made me a better man, Sarah. They sat together in the gathering darkness, hands intertwined, hearts full. The ranch stretched out around them, a testament to years of hard work and dedication. Inside the house, they could hear Margaret reading to their grandchildren, Samuel's wife having recently given birth to twins. Emma was away at teacher's college but would be home for the summer soon. This was the life Sarah had built, brick by brick, mistake by mistake, triumph by triumph. It was not the life anyone had expected for her, but it was a life filled with purpose and meaning and deep, abiding love. Years continued their steady march forward. Samuel took over most of the day-to-day ranch operations, allowing Ryder to slow down slightly. Emma returned from college and opened her own school in Las Vegas, becoming one of the most respected teachers in the territory. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, surrounded by the family she had helped create. Sarah continued teaching until she was 55, when arthritis in her hands made it difficult to write on the chalkboard for extended periods. She retired from formal teaching but continued tutoring students who needed extra help, never able to completely give up the work she loved. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Samuel and his wife were there with their 3 children. Emma had married a fellow teacher and brought her husband and 2 daughters. The house rang with laughter and conversation, multiple generations coming together to honor the love that had started it all. After dinner, when the younger children had been put to bed and the adults were relaxing on the porch, Emma asked her parents to tell the story of how they met. It was a story the family never tired of hearing, though the details had been shared many times before. "Your mother stepped off that stagecoach looking like she had just traveled through hell," Ryder began with a smile. "Dusty and tired and trying so hard to look like she knew what she was doing. And your father was this impossibly handsome cowboy who stopped to help a lost stranger," Sarah continued. "I thought he was being kind out of pity." "I was being kind because I was captivated," Ryder corrected. "I took one look at you and knew my life was about to change." "Did you really know right away," Samuel's wife asked, "that you would get married?" "I knew something important was happening," Ryder said. "I did not know exactly what, but I knew I wanted to know her better." And the more I learned about Sarah, the more certain I became that she was exactly who I had been waiting for. Even though I could not cook or clean or do any of the things a ranch wife was supposed to do, Sarah teased. "Especially because of that," Ryder said firmly. "You were real, Sarah. You were honest about your struggles instead of pretending to be perfect. That authenticity was more attractive to me than any amount of domestic skill could have been." Sarah leaned against her husband's shoulder, marveling at how the years had deepened rather than diminished their love. They had weathered challenges and losses, celebrated victories and survived setbacks, always together, always partners. "The most important thing your father ever said to me," Sarah told her children and grandchildren, "was that I was already perfect just as I was. I spent my whole childhood being told I was not good enough, that I needed to change to be worthy of love. But your father saw me clearly and loved me anyway. That changed everything." "You changed yourself," Ryder argued gently. "I just gave you space to become who you were meant to be." "We changed each other," Sarah said. "That is what love does. It does not demand perfection. It creates space for growth. It sees potential where others see failure. It believes in possibilities." As the evening wound down and family members began heading to bed, Sarah and Ryder remained on the porch, reluctant to end the perfect day. The desert night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. "You have any regrets?" Sarah asked quietly. "About marrying someone as flawed as me?" My only regret is that I did not find you sooner." Ryder kissed her forehead. "You are the best decision I ever made, Sarah Rawlins. Every single day with you has been a gift." Sarah closed her eyes, breathing in the familiar scent of sage and dust and home. She thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 30 years ago, convinced she would never be good enough. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right, that she would find love and purpose and a life beyond her wildest dreams. But perhaps that woman would not have believed her. Perhaps she needed to walk the long road of growth and discovery to truly understand her own worth. Perhaps the struggles and mistakes and failures were necessary to appreciate the triumphs that followed. "I love you," Sarah whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself." "I love you too," Ryder replied. "Always have, always will." They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that defied expectations. Sarah Foster, who had been told she would never be a good wife, had become so much more than that. She was a partner, a mother, a teacher, a pillar of her community, and most importantly, she was herself perfectly, wonderfully, imperfectly herself. And that, she had finally learned, was more than enough. The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, incorporating new techniques and technologies while maintaining the core values Ryder and Sarah had established. Emma's school in Las Vegas grew into one of the most respected educational institutions in Nevada, with students traveling from distant territories to study under her guidance. Both children credited their success to the lessons they had learned from their parents. That worth was not measured by perfection, that mistakes were opportunities for growth, and that love and support could help anyone achieve their potential. As Sarah and Ryder entered their 60s, they gradually stepped back from active work, content to watch the next generation carry forward the legacy they had built. They spent their days in quiet companionship, tending the garden, visiting with grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company after a lifetime together. Sarah never did receive word from her parents or siblings in Philadelphia. She had long since made peace with that loss, understanding that some people were too rigid in their thinking to accept anything outside their narrow worldview. Their rejection no longer had the power to hurt her because she had built her own family, one founded on acceptance rather than judgment. On a warm spring morning, when Sarah was 68 years old, she woke to find Ryder already up and dressed, standing by the bedroom window looking out at the land they had worked together for so many years. "Could not sleep?" she asked, joining him at the window. "Just thinking," Ryder said, slipping his arm around her waist, "about how lucky I am, how blessed we have been." Sarah leaned into his embrace, looking out at the familiar landscape bathed in early morning light. "We have had a good life, the best life." Ryder turned her to face him, and Sarah saw her own contentment reflected in his eyes. No regrets, no what-ifs, just gratitude for every day we have had together. "Every day," Sarah agreed, "even the hard ones, especially the hard ones because they made us stronger." They stood together in comfortable silence, two people who had traveled a long journey together and arrived at a place of profound peace and satisfaction. The ranch would continue without them eventually, passed down through generations who would carry forward the values and lessons they had established. But for now, they were content to simply be together, enjoying the life they had built from scratch. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, filling the room with golden light, Sarah thought about that long-ago day when she had stepped off the stagecoach in Las Vegas, terrified and uncertain, convinced she had nothing to offer. She thought about Ryder's kindness, Margaret's patience, and her own stubborn determination to keep trying despite countless failures. She thought about every burned meal and broken dish, every mistake and mishap that had once seemed like proof of her inadequacy. She understood now that those moments had not defined her. They had simply been part of the messy, imperfect process of becoming who she was meant to be. "You know what the best part is," Sarah said softly. "What?" Ryder asked. "I finally believe it. When you told me all those years ago that I was already perfect just as I was, I thought you were being kind. But now, I understand that you were telling me the truth. I was always enough, exactly as I was. I just needed time and love and support to see it myself." Ryder smiled, that same warm smile that had captured her heart 30 years earlier. "I always knew you would figure it out eventually. You just needed someone to hold up a mirror so you could see what I saw all along." They kissed then, a gentle kiss that held 3 decades of love, laughter, challenges, and triumphs. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible during those dark days in Philadelphia. This was not the ending anyone had predicted for Sarah Foster. It was not the ending she had imagined for herself. It was something far better, a life lived authentically, a love earned through honesty and vulnerability, a legacy built on acceptance rather than judgment. As they walked hand in hand out onto the porch to begin another day together, Sarah sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, for the mistakes that had taught her resilience, for the failures that had shown her strength, for the love that had given her courage to be herself. She was Ryder Rawlins, wife of Ryder, mother of Samuel and Emma, grandmother to 7 beautiful children, former teacher to dozens of students, and living proof that worth could not be measured by society's narrow standards. She had been told she would never be a good wife, but she had become so much more than anyone's definition of good could encompass. She had become herself, fully and completely, and that was the greatest triumph of all.